Great. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to episode 10 of season 2 of Into the Metaverse. Today, we're going to dive into something very interesting and different. We're going to dive into what is a democratic metaverse and how can we build one. And our guest for today is Professor Udi Shapiro. For background, Udi is an interdisciplinary scientist, internet pioneer, artist, and a proponent of e-democracy. He has been with the Weizmann Institute of Science since completing his PhD at Yale University in 1982. What's interesting, in 1993, Udi founded Ubique Limited, the first internet social network startup which launched Virtual Spaces 1.0, a social networking 2D metaverse application with 2D avatars on web pages, providing instant messaging, chat rooms, joint web surfing, online events and games, and integrated voice over IP. This was well before Facebook was founded and 2.5 decades before it announced its interest in the metaverse, let alone anyone talking about the metaverse aside of Neil Stephenson's book a long time ago. Udi sold Ubique to America Online, performed management buyout, and then sold it again in 1998 to IBM, where its technology was the basis for Same Time, which was IBM's successful corporate network communication and collaboration product. So a lot of amazing history here with Udi today. So Udi, really excited to welcome you to the show today.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Before we're diving in, we have a short message from our friends at Roundhill Investments.
This podcast is brought to you by Roundhill Investments, the advisor to the Roundhill Ball Metaverse ETF. The Roundhill Ball Metaverse ETF, which trades on the New York Stock Exchange under the ticker symbol METV, is the largest dedicated metaverse fund in the United States. The ETF tracks an index developed by Ball Metaverse Research Partners, a metaverse-focused indexing and research company headed by industry expert Matthew Ball. For a prospectus and more information, please visit roundhillinvestments.com/ETF/METV. Read carefully. Investing involves risk, including possible loss of principal. Investors should consider the investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses carefully before investing. Distributor Foreside Fund Services, LLC.
So, Udi, diving right into it, the first question we kick off each show is, what is the metaverse? And no less important, what do you believe the metaverse is not?
Okay. So, in one of Moliere's plays, a person, the protagonist who is aspiring to become a bourgeois gentleman, discovers to his joy and amazement that he's been speaking prose for all his life. So something like that happened to me 30 years ago. People came to me and told me, and I discovered to my amazement that I've been building a metaverse. So I can tell you how this came about, that I was building a metaverse without knowing that. Neil Stephenson's book came out in 1992, and I haven't read it by that time. But in 1993, we started to build our product, Virtual Places 1.0. And when it launched in 1995, it had these features that you said, and it was, in retrospect, a 2D metaverse. And people came to me and said, "Hey, you've read Snow Crash and you've built according to Snow Crash." I don't know what you're talking about. You build a metaverse. I said, fine. You want it to be a metaverse? It's a metaverse. So there you go. Some anecdotes. I'm not sure. Are you interested in anecdotes or just the dry facts? Anecdotes. Okay. So just so you get a sense how early it was in 1993. Okay. It was really the very beginning of the web, very, very early on. And Ubique, our business plan, was perhaps the first business plan that VCs saw that talked about doing business on the internet, or a startup based on the internet. And just I'll give you two anecdotes that are hard to believe, but they're true. One is that the VC who saw it said that I have a spelling mistake in my business plan, that internet is spelled with a hyphen, inter-net. So I didn't know how to spell internet. That's one thing. And the other thing, it was clear to me that I'm going into uncharted territory legally, because the only business on the web at that time, there was one business on the internet, not on the web, because the web didn't exist yet. On the internet, it was a server and a protocol called Gopher. It was one of those by now dead protocols that just before HTTP. And the business was selling electronic copies of newspapers, magazines, The Economist, I think, and a few others magazines, was selling them online. And that was the only business on the internet. So I asked in the whatever news groups there were and mailing lists, I asked, does anyone know of an attorney who knows about IP on the internet? Okay, that was the question. And I spread it around. And how many names did I get back? What's your guess? 0. When I launched my company, there were 0 attorneys who knew about IP on the internet, and the VCs thought the internet was spelled with a hyphen. Okay, that's when I started. Okay, and the reason why I did it is because I've been working for the previous decade on advanced high-level programming languages for distributed, concurrent distributed parallel systems, concurrent Prolog, concurrent logic programming languages, and we developed languages and systems for the last decade. And I thought, well, it's high time to bring them to practice. And when I saw the web, I thought this will be the beginning of the web. It had only, data and links to other data, or documents with links to other documents. That was the only thing there. You could look at the document, click on a link, and go to another document. That was it. I thought it would be good to have people there, so you can also you click on a link and talk to a person, not just see a document. And so the tagline of Ubiq was bringing people to the web, okay? Because the web didn't have people; it had only data. Not too much data, just a few pages here and there. It was before Yahoo, let alone before Google. So anyway, the tagline of Ubiq was bringing people to the web, and that was the state of VCs, the state of attorneys, and all that. And the product, in retrospect, it was a bit crazy what we did. We were ahead of our time in almost any dimension you can think about, and we were cutting our teeth, trying to do that. Also on tax issues, there were everything we did was like going through the jungle with a machete, So our product, in retrospect, it had like everything, It had instant messaging, it had chat rooms, it had voice over IP, which we licensed from Vocaltech at the time. Oh, and another indication how crazy early we were. Vocaltech developed their voice over IP for corporations, for corporate networks, not for the internet. So it was an intra-corporate product. And I told them we want to use it over the internet. They said, we don't know if it's going to work. I don't know. We don't know about the internet. So in our license agreement, I told them, if you're going to work with us, you must be connected to the internet. And there was an obligation. They signed an obligation on their behalf that they will be connected to the internet with at least 19.6 baud connection to support us. Kilobit or whatever. That was there. It was illegal. It was an obligation on they undertook an obligation to be all the time connected to the internet with at least 19.6 kilobaud so they can support us with their voice over IP product. So we launched, and we launched the product the same time Windows 95 was launched. But when we launched it, it was on Sun Microsystems on top of Unix. Virtual Places 2.0 was already on Windows 95, but the first product was announced was on Unix workstations. And we had voice over IP, we had chat rooms, instant messaging, web tours, so you can hop on a bus and someone would drive and everyone would follow on their browser from page to page. Online events, we later add online games. And of course, 2D avatars on the page, so you can actually see people moving about and highlight where you want and see the bubbles going when the people are talking. And this was our first product. So no wonder it was ahead of its time commercially as well. Anyway, so that's.
And thank you for that incredible historic perspective and history lesson, Udi. I think it's we'll also make sure that we share with the listeners some links or some screenshots of what the the virtual experience looked like back then. When you think about the human experience of what you guys have created, 27 years ago, and between human experience today on the internet in the context of the metaverse, what are the things that have not changed at all in your mind, and what are the things that have seen some form of transformation in human behavior?
Okay, I think, well, I'm not sure it's exactly what you've asked, but as a politician, well, I'm not a politician, but politicians never answer the question they were asked. They just give their message. So I'm not sure it's what you asked, but I have a message. And the message is that back then we thought, the internet is going to go that way. And there was the Declaration of Independence of Cyberspace of the Electronic Frontier Foundation. And everyone believed it's going to be a brave new world, which is going to be, much better and much equal. Everyone will have access. No one will have control. It was very, very optimistic and kind of forward-looking period where people thought, everyone, including myself, thought we were going to revolutionize the world to the better. And what happened since then, to my defense, I wasn't there for the last several decades in the sense that after I sold my company the second time to IBM, it was sold without my head attached. So I was free to go back to science, and I decided the life cycle of the internet is too fast for me. I wanted to slow down a little bit, and went to do biology. And biology, you have an idea, and then you share it with your students or your team, and then you can sleep for a year, and then it comes back to you. It worked, it didn't work, what to do next. So the pace is much, much slower. And I wanted to go back to basic science. So for 2 decades, until a few years ago, I've been doing biology with a computer science kind of perspective. So I'm not responsible for what happened the last 30 years to the internet, but yeah, okay. But what happened is actually unbelievably terrible, I think. And what happened is the opposite of what everyone was hoping for. Rather than having, egalitarian, distributed, shared, open environment, what happened? It became even more centralized and more controlled, and contributed greatly to much, much worse inequality in terms of money and power between people compared to what there was 30 years ago. So the internet, instead of being the great equalizer, became the great disequalizer of our society. And in some sense, that's what brought me back. Also, I felt I exhausted what I could contribute to biology, and I thought that, well, I thought that democracy is in a worse shape than cancer research. So, okay. So it's a greater risk to humanity. The state of democracy is a greater risk to humanity than the state of cancer. So I stopped. I kind of slowly phased out my biology research and started focusing back on digital democracy. And for me, the biggest question was, how come what we were thinking is going to happen never happened? What went wrong? And in particular, the internet revolutionized one industry after the other, left in ashes, the old world order. So many old ways of doing things, of industries, just were crippled and gone. Borders books, where I bought my biology books, is gone. And of course VCR rentals, and I mean, so much has been disappeared because of the internet, except for democracy, which is like practiced identically to the way it was practiced, almost identically 200 years ago, except some recent disruptions caused by the ability to disseminate fake news and all that. So I was trying to think. I was puzzled by this thing. How come the internet has revolutionized every field except the one that was the most kind of it felt it's inevitable that it'll happen, because what is democracy? It's about people communicating and sharing their opinions and sharing information and sharing their preferences and then aggregating them and then working according to them. So the internet is ideal for that, but the opposite has happened. So that's what I've been doing for the last 5 years, which resulted in my work on so-called democratic metaverse, which is where we are today. So I think I spoke enough. I'll let you guide me with the next question.
Well, I think this is a great segue to kind of connecting the previous one with the next one, which is as we would really love if you can introduce, before we dig deeper, if you can introduce your vision, concept, and current research on building an egalitarian or a democratic metaverse. What does it actually mean? What does it mean for humanity and for people, and how different it is from the metaverse that we are currently seeing that is being shaped?
Okay, I think any way you look at it, no matter how you turn this problem from one direction or from anywhere you look at it, if your goal is equality, in the digital realm, there is a bridge you have to cross, the problem you have to solve, which is fake and duplicate identities, digital identities, because you cannot have the equality has to be between people, not between accounts. And if you want equality between people in the digital realm, somehow you have to have this one-to-one association of people with digital accounts. Now, we know how to solve it in a centralized system. The government gives you passports or identity cards or whatever. The bank gives you an account. Google gives you, well, not Google, but the bank gives you an account after verifying your identity. So there are centralized solutions for doing it. But they're always depending on giving someone else control over who you are, over your digital identity. And the question that has to be addressed is how can this be done in the digital realm? Now, let's put this question aside. Let's talk about digital democracy for a second. There's a decentralized platform that's being emerged. You know, the cryptocurrencies, blockchain technology, and smart contracts. And at some point during the project, you know, initially we developed some. Initially, I thought all you need to do is just write some software and help that will let people, you know, act democratically, and that's what we think is a piece of software. Okay, but there was no solution a genuine solution to the sysadmin problem, you know, which can always get into and disrupt whatever the system that you're building was intended to do. Someone will have a super user password and disrupt it. And for me, it was a major revelation to see smart contracts on Ethereum saying, aha, there's no sysadmin. No one can, you know, no one can come and disrupt it. And at some point I said, okay, if we want to solve this problem, we can just write a smart contract on top of Ethereum. There are the DAOs that are being developed, and still there's this lingering question of digital identity, but at least we have the platform. But the more our research progressed, and this is a group that sort of emerged out of these questions at Weizmann with colleagues, students, postdocs. At Weizmann, we realized that actually things are sort of not the way they seem, in the following sense. First of all, that the cryptocurrency platforms that we are familiar with are all plutocratic. So they're based on powers distributed not to people, but to money. The more money you have, the more power you have, the more control you have. And furthermore, they're all designed with a rich get richer dynamics. So, you know, when they go up, at least the rich get richer. When they go down, you know, I don't know what happens. But when they go up, the rich get richer. And they, despite their promise, they help further exacerbate the problem of inequality. So platforms contribute to worsen inequality. You know, Facebook, Amazon, Airbnb, Uber, they all help increase inequality. And cryptocurrencies, unfortunately, also help increase inequality as opposed to decrease it. But if we have a solution to this identity problem, if people know who they are, there's no need for proof of work or proof of stake, because just these proof of work and proof of stakes are needed because you don't know who people are. You cannot trust anybody, so they have to prove who they are by computing something, or by putting cash on the table and say, fine, he exists because he has cash on the table. I don't care if this is a dog or a refrigerator or a computer, but they have cash, that's fine. They can compute, that's fine. But that's not good for democracy. For democracy, you want people who genuinely are genuinely identified. And if you solve it, then you don't need proof of work or proof of stake. So this kind of turned the tables on this direction and said, okay, if we want something which is egalitarian, not plutocratic, and we want something that is democratic, we have to solve the genuine identity problem anyway. Therefore, we can have a completely different foundation, which is not based on the standard kind of cryptocurrencies platform. So my current view is you have this huge branch in the digital realm, which is platform-based, authoritarian, centrally controlled, worth trillions of dollars. They have research labs, they have scientists, they have, thousands of scientists are paid to strengthen platforms and develop software, technology, patents, and all that. And then you have cryptocurrencies with, again, trillions of dollars of valuation, 100,000 programmers, thousands of scientists, thousands of patents, strengthening this plutocratic platform. And we must have a third alternative, which is egalitarian democratic, which no one is going to make money out of because it has to be common good. You cannot do an ICO. You cannot, but that's the one that the 8 billion people on the planet need.
I just want to reiterate to our audience and everyone who's listening, there is a third way. What you see is not all the options, but it's a very different world because Udi, what you're describing, and I don't want to be a cynicist because I'm not, but we do live in a world where greed and making money for the past hundreds of years have always been a big part of human endeavor, that wealth creation, that people aspire for better life, which is why the United States of America became, so successful, which is why the internet became what it is, for good or bad. And so what do you think when we talk about an egalitarian metaverse that is a common good? What would be the economic engine behind it? And what does it mean for the users and the builders within that third option?
Okay. It's a very big question. And I don't claim to have, I don't have a packaged, business plan that explains it. But I can give you some kind of general hints what I think it should be. First of all, I should say that just to give you a perspective, I've built systems before, in UBIC and also in the academia, and I have a sense of reality. Okay, reasonable sense of reality. Unfortunately, in retrospect, if you look at things I did in science, they all were, ahead of their time. So if I'm doing something now, it must mean it's ahead of its time, which unfortunately means it will take some time to be realized, which is, I accept that. But for the last 5 years, I always thought that we are, 6 years from starting implementation work, starting from writing software for the last 5 years. And we haven't written a single line of software still, because everything. So I think I was thinking I'm going to progress forward, but actually what I did, I was progressing downwards. And our research became deeper and deeper into the foundations of theoretical computer science, foundations of distributed computing. And just to give you a perspective, there is already known, we all talk about blockchain consensus and how you need it for smart contracts and for cryptocurrencies and all that. But there's already research that shows that you don't need consensus for some things. For example, you can have payment systems without consensus. You need something weaker than consensus, which can call equivocation exclusion or double spend exclusion. Okay, it turns out, and that's part of the foundational research that I've been doing for the last couple of years, that there is even a lower division, which is a lower kind of strata, which I call grassroot systems, which characterized by the fact that, and there is a mathematical characterization of these types of systems, characterized by the fact that a grassroots system can emerge independently in different locations at different times and later interoperate. Okay, so that's the definition. And you can think about, as it is easy to imagine, although not easy to define and build, but that's sort of part of my research, at least enabling research. You can imagine a serverless, distributed, grassroots social network, an alternative to Facebook, okay? Facebook, Twitter, WhatsApp, whatever. That starts by everyone having, in their smartphone some software. You can connect to people that are your friends, family, friends, neighbors, people you know and trust. And you start communicating with them, and the network builds grassroots bottom up. And if people in Israel or in my village in Israel create this, and then in another village create this, and if someone happens to be a member of both, then it connects and it can grow bottom up. So it's easy to imagine that. I have a mathematical characterization of what it is. Then the next level, and this is a long answer to your question. The next level, you can, and I have again a paper about this. There is a notion of self-sovereign or sovereign cryptocurrencies, sovereign personal cryptocurrencies, where people can issue their own cryptocurrency and be their sovereign, like a state, and then interoperate with other people with their currencies and have exchange rates emerge, etc., etc. So there is a mathematical foundation for grassroots cryptocurrencies as well. And just as a side note, of course, Bitcoin, Ethereum, etc., are not grassroots. You cannot have two Bitcoins emerge in different places and then have one Bitcoin. It's not. So all existing cryptocurrencies are not grassroots. But you can have cryptocurrencies which are grassroots, which are built on top of that. So the answer is, again, the full answer will take a long time, but the general direction is that it is possible, mathematically, conceptually, and I hope also economically and practically, to build systems which are grassroots, which do not give control to any specific organization or entity, that emerge and support local communities and local commerce. And if you think, what is the worst thing that the digital economy is doing to the world? It's really sucking value outside of local communities into global platforms. So local communities are getting weaker and weaker and poorer because there's no local commerce, there's no local interaction. Everything, you just click on a link and it ships from somewhere in cyberspace through via Amazon to your doorstep, and you don't buy anymore in your local whatever. Okay, so my hope, and then, as I said, based on my past experience, it means it's a few decades away. Based on my personal experience of what I've been doing, everything I did was a few decades ahead of its time, a decade or more. So, and I accept that this vision is a few decades ahead of its time, but the vision is bringing power back to local communities, okay? And this grassroots software, and this goes back to what's the financial model. This has to be common good. And we know how to build common good. The US is filled with common good. All the highways, all the bridges, they're all common good. Water systems, these are all common good that's needed for our life. So it's not true that the US is just, private capital. There's a huge infrastructure which is a common good. This has to be common good. This is another software infrastructure that has to be funded by governments, by philanthropic organizations that will have, every village in Africa, in Asia, in Israel, in the US can have their own local bootstrap, high quality, the whole stack of all the functions without central control, without giving away personal information for advertisements, without paying anybody, just as a common good funded by governments and philanthropists who want to support local communities as opposed to sucking value and power from local communities to global platforms and global brands. That's sort of the social economic vision.
I was about to ask it, and then you said it, so I'm glad you said it. It's kind of this dichotomy, and you've dealt with venture capitalists in your past, right? There's so much capital available in VC land for companies in the crypto and the metaverse space right now, even with crypto markets imploding as we're recording. And so I was going to ask about that, but you kind of answered it, right? This needs to be funded not by VCs and not by private capital. This is something. We look at the internet, that was funded by governments. We look at NASA, that was funded by governments, right? This is beyond the realm of private capital. This can be a public-private partnership, but we need governments to step in here to really make this work, it sounds like.
Well, I think VCs have enough money to afford to spend some of it on philanthropy. But it cannot be a make-believe philanthropic project, which is, okay, let's give everybody something and then extract value out of everybody. which there are some projects who look like that, to say, oh, we're going to give you, stuff, lots of stuff for free, and then we're going to skim everything at the top. So that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about true philanthropy, not make-believe philanthropy.
Of course, exactly. And so I think from that perspective, we talked about this, and you asked this to Angela Dalton on a prior episode. She's a VC in the space. It's like we have this vision of this egalitarian metaverse empowering individuals and creators and reconciling that with the, how profitable the web platforms today are. It's these VCs want 45% EBITDA margins that Google has, then that's what they want at scale. So it's this weird dichotomy. So I definitely understand what you're saying is, this is something that's a lot bigger. It's a lot longer term looking, and I do think we need governments and like the UN to get involved to kind of put together, and research institutes like the Weizmann Institute to come together and put this together and lead the charge, just like we did in developing the internet. I think people forget that the internet came out of the Defense Department in the US.
Yeah, in terms of the dynamic, again, I don't want to prophesize, but in terms of the dynamics, I think it has to be sort of a guerrilla project initially. And I think with people who volunteer, open source type of thing, because you see, the problem is also, or especially in Israel, but everywhere, is that people who are in this space can make so much money by joining, machine learning companies or crypto companies or whatever, that a job, a government funded job or a Weizmann Institute funded job will never be attractive. Financially, you cannot compete. It has to be a kind of voluntary, ideologically driven commitment by some technical people who want to make this happen, because they've made enough money and want to contribute, or because they have enough spare time to contribute on the side. But it cannot be, you cannot raise money and compensate people financially for doing this work. It has to be, work of love.
But I think also another motivation, Udi, and I'm sure this is a big part of why you're doing this, is we all recognize the point of time and the inflection point of the role of technology in our lives, right? There's a bunch of different existential risks that are surrounding the global population, anywhere from climate change to destabilization with geopolitics to the economic uncertainty that is plunging the markets. And so I think what a project of that nature and at that scale, especially knowing that we're really at the beginning of that journey, as you said, this is at least a decade plus, if not more, of a journey. It requires mission-driven people who really want to create and enable a world that you're describing, where there is an egalitarian and democratic digital realm, where local communities and local population can once again thrive in a way that they haven't been for the past several decades. And I think that mission-driven, either if people do it voluntarily or not, is I think a really important component to, as you say, to really attract top talent to come in and help define and build that, very much like other pioneering frontiers, back in the day. And I think what's happening now, which is on the one hand interesting and on the other hand is challenging, is that there is this inflection point where Metaverse and Web3 technologies is also very much associated with massive economic gains because of cryptocurrencies and these massive riches that have been created over the past decade. And I want to refer her to, and maybe get your perspective on something you actually wrote 5 years ago. And I'd love you to kind of, maybe speak about that and why you have that certain perspective on Bitcoin and current version of cryptocurrencies. And, you wrote a Medium post about 5 years ago, basically describing Bitcoin as sort of, a cancerous activity. And so it'd be great if you can unpack that for a second. Why did you refer to it in that nature, and what does it mean for how do we do it differently?
Okay, I think there are two aspects here which are orthogonal. One is the speculative nature of cryptocurrencies, which I don't want to talk about. I don't have, I'm not an economist. I don't have any special value to give on that. People can bet on whatever they want. But specifically, I'm talking about proof of work and the dynamics of proof of work. Proof of work is an environmental disaster. There's no other way to say it. It's an environmental disaster. And if we had a responsible world government, they would have outlawed today Bitcoin. Today. There's absolutely no justification to destroy the planet for this activity, especially since we know that there are algorithmic alternatives. It's not that, oh, the value of free currency, distributed, blah blah blah, is so important that we must destroy the environment as we're doing it. No, even if you believe that the value is so big, you can still do it without destroying the environment. Therefore, the only responsible thing is to outlaw Bitcoin today. And every responsible government has to do that. And if the Bitcoin community is, hard pressed, I'm sure with a gun pointed like this, they will switch to proof of work, proof of stake. There are enough technologies to do that. They say, oh, let's save our soul and build a Bitcoin plus, and then shower to everybody the same. So don't worry, whatever you had in old Bitcoin, you'll have a new Bitcoin, and we'll abandon ship and jump to the new ship, and it will be proof of stake, and we will not be accused anymore of destroying the planet. It's a very simple thing. And so it's not against the values of cryptocurrency. It's not about whether it helps investments or helps the small investor or destroys the small investor. These are all. I'm not talking about this at all. I'm talking about specifically the use of proof of work as opposed to alternatives, for example, proof of stake. And proof of work must be outlawed today. That's all.
No, I definitely get that. And, we spoke with, in the last episode, we spoke with Sutu, who's a creator, and he's using the Tezos blockchain for his work. And because that's proof of stake. I mean, same thing when we spoke with Ubisoft in season 1, all the blockchain work they're doing in their gaming portfolio is on Tezos, again, because they were the first to go proof of stake at scale for the environmental reasons that you discussed. So there's definitely solutions there to make that work. It'll be quite interesting to see Ethereum, because Ethereum's right now trying to go from proof of work to proof of stake.
Yeah, they're trying, and I'm sure they're doing it because of their conscience. But if there was a gun in their head, they would do it faster. That's all.
Exactly. And so, well, maybe with Ethereum down, 70%, there's a bigger gun to their head to get it done now. So,
well, it's there's always talk about green investment and all that. Green investment is divesting every proof of work cryptocurrency. That's green investment, and investors should do it, and government should outlaw it, and it'll go away, because right now it's just an absolute disaster.
Absolutely. And I think maybe like one last question, since we're kind of getting close to time here, but you kind of alluded to it before. I just wanted to go back to it. Israel has been a hotbed for technology for many, many years, for lots of reasons that we don't have enough time to get into. But what you're kind of describing, this egalitarian metaverse, kind of feels like the digital version of a kibbutz to me. This communal shared economy, sense of identity within the collective. And I don't know if that's a term you've used, but I just wanted to ask, about Israel in particular, because it's just been so strong in technology for so many years. Does Israel have a strong role to play in the development of the metaverse, and what expertise can Israel rely on to carve itself out in this next iteration of the internet?
Well, I'm not that politician to talk about what Israel is or is not, but I can tell you that an inspiration for me in doing this is not so much the kibbutz as well as my village where I live in Israel. It's a small village called Nataf. It has about 500 people. And when I think about the community, about people, friends, relatives, and how they interact, and that's what I have in mind, because the people babysit for each other and help each other, work for each other in some ways. There are some yoga teachers, there are some Alexander method teachers, and next to us there are no other commerce in the village. All the commerce is in the next village, Abu Ghosh. And there's a interacting commercial relations. I mean, they have all the shops, but they also have builders and gardeners who work for us, and then we spend money there. So I keep thinking, what if we had the Nataf currency and the Abu Ghosh currency, and then if they had some interoperation and this a grassroots crypto economy can when I try to imagine it in a concrete way, I keep thinking about our village, our village next door, what happens inside us, what happens there, how people know and trust each other. And there are many people there I know and trust, and they would give me credit, I would give them credit, which is the foundation. I didn't say that, but a key aspect of these sovereign cryptocurrencies is that they can bootstrap an economy without external capital or credit, simply by mutual credit lines. People giving each other credit, people who know and trust each other giving each other credit, and then you have liquidity, and then you can have, everything else works. So I do have inspiration from my local Israeli kind of vicinity in thinking about that. Even though, right, for the last year I've been in New York. Right now I'm in New York City.
Well, that's kind of a shared affinity. Both Udi and I are Israelis, but we both live in the U.S. at the moment. One thing I want to add, or sort of, I have a bit of that provocative perspective, Udi, on the role of technology in the metaverse, and I might have mentioned it when we first spoke over Zoom, which is, historically, human society started in these really small collective with hunters and gatherers, and then slightly bigger agricultural communities, right? And I think obviously now we became the world is flat, as Thomas Friedman is saying, and we're all one big village. And I am very curious, and this is more of a kind of provocative thought for the future, and maybe a follow-up episode in a couple of years' time. I do believe, and maybe even want to see how technology, the metaverse, crypto networks enable that historic connection between communities and people in small groups that can interact, commerce between one another. I am very curious on how the internet, the metaverse, and crypto networks can once again bring that human connection from 2,000 years ago, but in a whole new futuristic manner that takes us forward. Just a thought I have of what that sort of world looks like. What are the underlying infrastructure and technologies that will enable that? And I think I want to finish by saying that something maybe bold, and I might be totally fooled to say that, or people will think, oh, that was a pretty big, bold bet that Jon made in the podcast. But I do believe that, Udi, you and the work you're doing and the research that you're now doing with your colleagues is as important as the research that people like Berners-Lee and the early internet movement of the late 80s and the early 90s. And I'm certain that we're going to look backwards to the episode today and the work you guys are doing now as really the early foundations, the early days of potentially establishing a different way of using the internet to create a better, more connected, more collaborative, more prosperous global population than ever before. And hopefully bringing those early days of humanity in a futuristic manner and creating more equality, because we're definitely not in that direction at the moment. And for the world to continue and thrive, we need to build that sort of less mercenary and more collaborative and more equal population.
Thank you.
So with that in mind, thank you, Udi, for joining us. And Matthew and I had a great enjoyment to listen. We're going to add some links to the follow-up and when we release the episode. But thank you for being with us. It's been absolutely captivating.
Thank you. I hope I gave you enough metaverse meat during the talk, because I think we went into many different directions and not always focused on the word metaverse. So, but I hope it was relevant enough.
It was, and I think it's great to unpack this metaverse word and bring more and more context into what are the actual things and the aspects that come into the metaverse as we really start to popularize the term and ultimately making sure that it's much more than a connected virtual world of video games.